Good evening, everyone. I wish I had brought my sunglasses. Welcome to the opening event of this year's KDI Burst, a program of the Kuski Design Initiative, KDI as we call it. I'm Carol Strohecker, Dean of the College of Design. Let's begin with a land acknowledgement and statement of unity. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. We are committed to recognizing the complex history of this land by honoring the truth of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement in the context we share now. We respect the people on whose land we live, work, and learn as we seek to improve and strengthen relations with our tribal nations. We resist the culture of anti-Black racism, and we stand with our Hmong, Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander communities. We know that words are not enough, and remain committed to the work of eradicating injustices against all Black, Indigenous, people of color, and those whose gender identity transcends the binary. Because words are not enough, the College of Design is immersed in a design justice initiative in addition to KDI. Through Design Justice, we are updating our curricula, and we are collaborating with companies and neighbors to create opportunities for historically underinvested groups within design industry and academia. These efforts have changed us. The College of Design is not the same as we were a few years ago. We see the boundaries between groups differently and interact more with people in other disciplines, departments, and communities. Tonight, we celebrate the boundary-crossing work of the renowned designers Ray and Charles Eames. They considered deeply and playfully needs of the many people who would experience the buildings, exhibits, furniture, and all kinds of things created in their Eames office. For Ray and Charles, it was not enough to craft fitting experiences for individuals and groups of people. They also considered the surrounding systems of materials sourcing, manufacture, distribution, and disposal. These pillars of American design enacted an ethic of care to minimize the environmental and societal impacts of the things they created and the processes they engaged. You have to care deeply, Ray would often say, and you have to strive for goodness all the way down. Ray and Charles were masters of the core design skill of empathy, as they considered all scales of human experience and timescales beyond the lifespan of each object and space they created. The Eames office valued diverse perspectives, both among those who generated the designs and those who benefited from them. Ray and Charles looked for what different cultures have in common and built from those shared values and purposes to bridge cultures. This approach of finding a common language and shared view of opportunity is also how KDI's namesake, Christopher Kuski, practiced design. His longtime partner, Alan Kolkowitz, is here with us tonight, as is Oliver Dinn with Heather. Oliver is the CEO of the McNeely Family's Manitou Fund, whose generosity enables us to conduct this event, along with all the KDI scholarships, research support, and programming throughout the year. Alan has emphasized the importance of context in considering the work of Charles and Ray Eames. The extraordinary turmoil of World War II had given rise to a new sense of opportunity, which the Eameses explored through experimenting with various materials and forms. Let's also remember that design plays an essential role in evolving communities and shaping cultural narratives as we look to Ray and Charles for inspiration now. Please join me in welcoming their granddaughter, Lisa Demetrios. Lisa has spent her adult life caring for the Eames collection and curating the Eames Ranch, initially alongside her mother, Lucia Eames, and now as chief curator alongside the Eames Institute of Infinite Curiosity team. She is a founding and current member of the Eames Foundation Board of Directors and a shareholder of the Eames office. Also with us this evening is John Carey, a graduate of the College of Design's Architecture program and now the founding president and CEO of the Eames Institute of Infinite Curiosity. John is driven by a curiosity about the relationship between design and dignity. He has spent the past 2 decades working in nonprofit, philanthropic, and thought leadership organizations, including the Obama Foundation, the Aspen Institute, and TED. I cannot imagine anyone better suited than Krista Tippett to moderate this evening's dialogue exploring empathy at scale. A journalist, National Humanities Medalist, and best-selling author, Krista Tippett has created a singular space for reflection and conversation in American and global public life. She founded and leads the On Being Project, a groundbreaking media and public life initiative pursuing deep thinking and moral imagination, social courage and joy to renew inner life, outer life, and life together. Krista, John, and Lisa, welcome.
Hello. I had to turn my phone into a clock. We were discussing how it used to be in the olden days. There would always be a clock in a room like this. I'm so glad to be here. And Carol, where are you now? I thought you might tell the story. I was in our studio on Loring Park, I don't know, about 1.5 years ago, and it was these strange years we've been in, so big studio, one person sitting at the table, and there was this knock on the door, and nobody ever knocks on the door in Hennepin, and you told me about this project, the work you do here, and asked if I'd be part of something, and
Krista graciously opened the door to a masked stranger.
That's right. Yeah, anyway, here we are. And I really want to thank you for drawing me into this. I mean, of course, I knew of Ray and Charles Eames, but I feel like this invitation brought me into this beautiful universe that I really didn't know existed in all its fullness. And there's been it's been really delightful to delve deep into this legacy and art and craft and the sensibility behind it. And within it, and I've also really been struck by the delight and the love and the passion that the two of you that bursts forth when you speak about this. And to me, just in the few conversations we've had, and then as I did dive in and watch some videos, right, and read some things, Ray and Charles, which is I've started to calling them that, which is how everyone refers to them, they feel very alive. And they feel alive in how you are in this time in the world. So tonight, this is not about commemorating or preserving, but really, I think, inquiring how this living legacy can accompany us now in this world. And I do find the topic completely intriguing, empathy at scale. So we'll kind of go into all of those words. But I want to start with, I'm going to start with you, Lisa. Just begin at the beginning. I mean, I wonder how you would trace an apprehension of empathy, even if you didn't have the word for it yet, in your kind of earliest memories of what we're calling the Eames design legacy, but which for you was also your family.
Well, it's fun to look at the legacy both as a curator but also as a granddaughter.
Yeah.
So what you remind me of is that Ray and Charles said less teaching, more found learning. So just being around them when you visited the office was extraordinary. And even something as simple as going out to dinner with them was a moment of learning. And what I mean by that is, so I'm about 8 years old. We go down to the cafes near the beach in Venice, California, Abbot Kinney, for those of you familiar. And we're walking back from dinner. It's just a few blocks back to the office. And Charles turns to me and he says, "What did you think of dinner?" Now, it was borscht. I was 8 years old. You can do the math. I said to him, quite frankly, I didn't like it very much. You know what he said to me? "How would you have done it differently?" Which means if you're going to complain about something,
Yeah.
you better have another alternative. But I felt empowered, is what I'm trying to say, and I felt heard. And so then we had a story about, like, well, why did you think the chef made it that day? Well, maybe it was their favorite dish, the only thing at the market. And so we had this whole story going back to the office. Now, I shared that story when the Eames show was in Oakland in 2018 with the docents. I wanted the docents to have a few of the things, the experiences that I had, which were quite extraordinary. I know my grandparents were amazing as designers, but they were even more amazing as grandparents. They never talked down to us. So when I shared that story and visited the exhibit, one of the docents came back to me and said, "Lisa, your story worked. The next time my grandchildren complained about the salads, I said, how would you do it differently?"
Yeah.
And it turned out it was the mushrooms. So this is part of, every time I get to share about my grandparents' legacy is a gift. And this is why it's such a treat to be here with you, because it allows us to see how these stories still resonate today. And I think they can still live on in different ways.
And John, when and how did you first enter this legacy or become aware of it? And was there, how do you remember a sense of empathy being part of the experience?
Thanks, Krista. I first met Lisa, and visited this magical place called the Eames Ranch in late 2017. I knew a lot about the Eameses from going to school here, and Ralph Rapson, who's kind of a legend within the College of Design and the Twin Cities, was a contemporary of the Eameses and was part of the Case Study House program in Los Angeles. And so I was very familiar with it, to the point that I was an avid Craigslist and eBay collector, as some of my friends in the audience know all too well. And when I heard about this place called the Eames Ranch, I said, "Oh, there must be some mistake. Like, I would know if there was an Eames Ranch 50 miles from my house." And sure enough, 2 days later, I was getting a warm hug from Lisa. And one of the things that I didn't know about the Eameses that I discovered at the Eames Ranch, and is something that we've really tried to foreground in our tours and in our visitors' experience, is this thing called the overlapping interest diagram. And it kind of looks like a Venn diagram, if you can imagine just like 3 circles converging in a single point. And in the top left corner, it's called the interests of the designers, interests of the design office. The second is the concerns of the client. And the third is the concerns of society. And it was in that intersection of the designer, the client, and society that the Eameses committed to working. And that really resonated with me. In fact, that became the thing that I latched onto as like how to make sense of doing the work that I had done historically and going in and investing in this legacy and how to carry it forward into the future. And so it makes more sense, in fact, than a lot of other transitions I've made in my career. And it's just been the most thrilling thing to be able to work with this legacy, be able to think about how we translate it into contemporary times and look forward into the future. And Ray and Charles, were such models for that at that time. There's a lot that we can learn from them. And then I think what I probably get most excited about, and Lisa, I think normally she and I agree on this a lot of times, is just to see how people are adapting their values and their lessons today, whether they identify as designers or not. And so it's been the most remarkable almost 5 years that I've had a chance to be part of this.
And being in conversation with that wider energy from this very particular, really vibrant standpoint. Okay, so to me, as this was new and intriguing, this juxtaposition between empathy and design. Empathy as a value for design, a component of design, as a design principle. And I wonder if this language is widely spoken in the world of architecture and design.
I mean, I think everyone in this room might have an opinion about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that word has permeated deeply. It certainly didn't when I was in school. There were a lot of amazing things that we focused on at that time. But I think one of the kind of movements within the design world that has introduced the word empathy and the kind of that mindset is the human-centered design work that IDEO and IDEO.org, its nonprofit spinoff, have really propagated. Before that time, it was kind of known as user-centered design, and in advance of that, it was known as either participatory design or in some circles, APROTech, appropriate technology, just to see how, just some understanding that the context matters, even back in the 70s and 80s, before some of the current social movements have really, pushed on it. What I love beyond kind of the empathy-based, human-centered design movement is that it's evolved in recent years into what is called, by the likes of Creative Reaction Lab, an amazing organization in St. Louis, equity-centered design. And so it's really been interesting to see it kind of take its next step. And at the end of the day, it is design, and some of us feel opinionated, I'm sure, about design thinking and human-centered design and all these other things. I think the best of designers really want to have design embody all of those things. And maybe I'll pause there.
Well, I would just add that design is a verb for my grandparents. Design is a method of action. It is not about changing the color of the toothbrush. It is about making a change and an improvement. And every project that my grandparents did, it was a need that they saw or that somebody came to them. That was it. That's how it was defined. Now, the way they addressed these needs was, so they called it the guest-host relationship. Your job is to anticipate the needs of your client before they've even thought of it. And it's in any job that you're in, as a sculptor, a designer, architect, doctor. And so when you approach problems like that or needs, you come at it in a very elliptical way. You ask a lot of questions. Ray and Charles said it's very important to enter any situation with no preconceived notions, and therefore ask a lot of questions is what they did.
But I also hear, I picked up on this too in my reading it, it's this notion of hospitality, right? Because you could talk about the client being a host in a client relationship and hear that more cynically, right? It's just smart.
Right.
But it feels to me, it feels to me that it also, if you combine that with the sensibility of empathy, and hospitality to me is a kindred virtue to empathy.
Well, I would like to give you a couple of examples that when John was talking about the overlapping interest in this diagram, they're working with IBM. IBM is asked to make a large donation to a new museum. They'd say, we'd rather give you an exhibit by Ray and Charles Eames. Then they go to Ray and Charles and say, what should it be about? And what Ray and Charles thought about was exciting the next generation of mathematicians and scientists. It's working with Herman Miller. It's not just to design a chair. And by the way, each chair had a unique situations. My grandparents wanted that tandem seating to last at the airport because it got a lot of working over the years. But it's also thinking sustainably. Not everyone's going to save their Eames chair. So if it goes in the landfill, it's not toxic. But also the harvesting of the materials is also, Ray discontinued the harvesting of Brazilian rosewood when she heard of the impact on the forest. So what we're showing through the collection are those years when it went into cherry and walnut. Then Ray said to my family, or the next generation, when you can bring back a sustainable version, do. And we did about 10 or 15 years ago. So what I think is so important that we can show through the collection is how Ray and Charles made these choices of being empathetic, and also they were friends with Bucky Fuller. He was also talking about these ideas that there's limited resources and we need to be really sensitive, that it has to be that goodness all the way down that Carol brought up. It has to work for everybody. That's sustainability.
I'm glad, I like that you brought that up. I wanted to ask, obviously, they lived in a very different time. They lived in literally a different century, and there's so much resonance. There's so much direct, clear resonance, and yet our age has its particularities, to say the least. And so I am curious I would love to hear a little bit more from both of you about what in this being part of our generation in time, this century. what is bringing into relief these principles and this sensibility in a new way? Where is the age we inhabit taking this?
Well, first, I like to say that Ray and Charles were a 21st century couple living in the 20th century, so we're just catching up.
Yeah.
But I think where we see it's people are reevaluating things and approaching situations, as I said, more elliptically or more thoughtfully. And what often happens for us is someone visits us at the ranch, and it's through being familiar with a chair. But then they realize that actually Ray and Charles made exhibits, or then they also did graphics. And so there's an empathy also. I feel like it comes through with my grandparents' work. For both of them, Ray came to design through painting, Charles through architecture. They both had early loss in their families. The middle child passed away shortly after Ray was born. For Charles, his father, he was a Pinkerton detective who got shot in a shootout when he was a teenager, slowly passed away from his wounds in St. Louis, wrote mystery stories based on his adventures to support the family. But then Charles worked at the steel mill to support his mother and sister after he passed when he was a teenager. So nothing was taken for granted. And you also worried about other people's children and families. It wasn't about just our family and what we were doing, but how can you help the next generation? And that was always at the core of what they talked about to us growing up, and that I talk to people today. And I watch these aha moments that we see people connecting with. They're going to do things differently after they visited.
Yeah, I think the Eameses remain models for democratizing design, and many of us in this room might associate them with expensive chairs at Design Within Reach or something of the sort, but at the time, their furniture was incredibly affordable. That's why you saw it and continue to see it in laundromats, in airports, in dentist offices, all over the place. So that democratizing design really resonates with me, and I love looking at contemporary practices like Mass Design Group, which is a Boston and Kigali-based nonprofit organization that recently won the AIA Firm Award, one of the highest honors in our profession for a firm that is really bringing incredible design and architecture to communities that wouldn't normally benefit from it, and working in completely new ways with communities through immersion, through co-locating with the people that they're designing with, not just for. And I think the Eameses no doubt influenced that practice, but that's an extension of the kind of democratizing design that is certainly one of their many legacies.
And they even had an expression to make the best for the most for the least. The best product for the most people for the least amount of money, and always trying to bring it down to the consumer benefiting.
I think when I first met you, John, you were maybe with some of those designers from Mass Design at that weird event we attended in a CC, and they were working on the hospital. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that
Whole
was
different-
shortly after probably the opening of the first phase of the Butara Hospital in Burera, Rwanda.
Yeah.
And it was a group of students that met with the founders of Partners in Health, a renowned global health organization led at that time by the late Dr. Paul Farmer. And they, against great odds, in a location with what would be perceived to be limited resources, had constructed this really catalytic and transformative building that has since grown into a campus and has extended into this larger campus called the University of Global Health Equity. And they did this in a unique way with local labor and local materials at a scale that we really haven't seen here in the United States. And so Mass is this now large 300-plus employee organization, still a nonprofit. It is, I think, a model in many respects. It is also struggling with so many of the same issues that all organizations, all universities struggle with today and have to contend with.
So another word in the title for this event is scale. And I have to say, I don't know, scale is a problematic word culturally. We've kind of, to use religious language, made an idol of it, right? It's often a completely linear, unimaginative metric. but obviously that's not what the word scale means in this context. I don't know, some of the language I found is an adventure in magnitude. But really, I mean, so empathy at different scales. What are we talking about when we talk about empathy at scale in the context of this design model?
I like that question. I like that observation. Ray and Charles considered mass production a good thing because everything they made they called gifts, and they could make more gifts, and they could raise the quality for more people. I think empathy also for me, Ray and Charles were very concerned about the environment in the 70s. And so when they were asked to do an aquarium, the National Aquarium proposal, it was how could people care about what's in the oceans when they can't even see underwater? So they had saltwater tanks and created this National Aquarium proposal. They knew it probably wouldn't go through, and it didn't. So they purposely created a booklet and a short film that set the bar for anyone after to build on the learning that they had. So I sort of feel like what we're trying to do is make available as things that Ray and Charles did, and that others are going to build on this. I feel like what I'm doing is planting vineyards or farms, and it will be seasons and seasons before we actually are enjoying the fruits of the labor. But it's also, Ray and Charles called it making the invisible visible. And so for people to care about the oceans was to see the wonderful creatures that lived underwater and to see how they moved through them for this. And so that's part of the empathy of scale was also empathy towards the environment, also to people, to all across the board. So for me, there's many versions of this.
One portal into the world of Ray and Charles Eames is their landmark film called The Powers of 10. It's still screened probably on a daily basis.
So let's talk about that. I wanted to ask
classrooms,
you about it.
and that's the first thing that came to mind.
I watched this film. My daughter was in the next room. She's like, "What are you watching?" She said, "Are they going to get into fractals next?"
No, the film only goes. Fractals were not. Quarks were not proven.
But
I'm joking.
But it's right. If that film were made today, they would probably
We've
use the word
added 5. Yes, there are 5 powers of 10 since.
Yeah.
But the film I'm sorry. I'm like, which way should I go? The film for them really was the culmination.
Okay, wait. Let's see what it is.
The Powers of 10
Yeah.
is a film about showing the orders of magnitude, of showing that you can get in 40 jumps from the smallest to the largest thing in the universe.
Okay, I want to paint the picture. So it starts with a view of a person lying on a blanket, having a picnic in a park. Where's in Chicago?
First
Yeah.
it was Florida, then it turned to Chicago.
Okay. And then you zoom out from there, and in 10 seconds, you're looking at the entire planet, and then 10. So each is a. Okay, you go from you do it.
No, it starts with, as you said, a picnic of a couple having a picnic, and it goes up to 10 meters by 10 meters, then 100 meters by 100 meters. The first version of the film actually was to see if they could do the shot. Now, when I was growing up, I saw my grandfather filming it from a crane, zooming in for each one of those panels. What was really cool is in 2010, October 10th, 2010, my family created a website, and we did a whole thing with Core 77 of everyone sending their own versions of Powers of 10. And it was really exciting to see what other versions there were, different locations, different picnics. It was really amazing. So it's still riffed on The Simpsons to, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, you go from, at some point, the solar system has shrunk to a point in the distance, and then it goes back.
That's 10 to the plus 12, yes.
10, okay. You obviously grew up with this.
No. What the reason it's something I think that's important, that children are looking at screens all day and they think everything's the same size. That's a problem.
Yeah.
They are not understanding, having that institutional knowledge of how much bigger or how much smaller something is next to each other.
Well, and how much things are connected.
Exactly.
How much things are
That's a
connected,
big
yeah.
part of the scale.
Yeah.
The lesson of what they did was to show, kind of connect people to that large view.
Well, it struck me also that it's actually this is scale of connection, not size.
Right. This one's distance, but it's interesting because then after watching the film, you can ask. I mean, I've shown the film to third graders, and looking at like a flower, what does it look at the DNA of the flower look like versus what it is in a field? And it's fun to watch them juxtapose this. And I just think it's just a great tool. I mean, everything we're doing is really I'm wanting to help people add more tools to their toolkits. Charles always said, if all you have is a hammer in your toolkit, you're going to solve every problem with a hammer. And obviously that doesn't work. So this is just another way to look at how Ray and Charles looked at things, and one of them was through scale. They would always start very small. I know people think today there's thousands of Eames chairs. Well, to do that, they made the first chairs themselves in their apartment by themselves. They made the first 5,000, and guess what they noticed? You had to make the prototypes, but also the machines that made the prototypes. Then they could work with Herman Miller, who could scale it up to 100,000. So part of what I like to do is bring it back to the essence
Right.
of how Ray and Charles started.
Yeah, this sentence, there has to be goodness all the way down, in a way is also a statement about scale. The depth of scale.
Yes. What I love is over the years you hear Charles talking or Ray talking about something in different versions. And in this, one of the ones I most remember was producing furniture with Herman Miller. So the design had to be good for the designer, for the company, for the person making the furniture on the line, for also the city itself beneficial. It had to be good for everybody. And that's what sustainability meant to them. Because if not, it's going to break, and that's not good.
You said in this, you said in an email to me, getting ready for this, everything with Ray and Charles is a chain reaction with one thing leading to the next, which is just another image to throw in here about what we're talking about.
You want to give a chain reaction? I love the chain reactions because, and you have to understand, this was my normal. Like, this is normal to me to see grandparents working on a piece of furniture, an exhibition coming up, hosting grandchildren, but also working on a proposal for like the National Aquarium. They had 20 saltwater tanks at the office. Has anyone taken care of a saltwater tank? 1 is high maintenance. 20 is just a whole other level. But there was an octopus who only liked Charles. He would change colors for Charles. So the thing is like, I thought it was very natural that when you walked into the office, and again, they never talked down to us. I was 12 when Charles passed, 22, as I said, when Ray passed. They just actually wanted to see what we looked at, what we were engaged in, and would answer the questions. And so I feel I'm actually not worried about my kids. I'm worried about everybody else's kids. And so I got to stand on the shoulders of giants, and what I want to do is share the view. And that's part of my empathy, is because I know how fortunate I am. But I also know this is a way to solve problems, this design process thinking that Ray and Charles had. And I really feel somebody just might want a little bit of it, that's fine, but I'm happy to give as much as someone will take.
John, I thought you wanted to say something over there.
I just like listening. I mean, you'd be amazed. I just tag along for Lisa's tours by and large, and I love how she welcomes guests as she did with Carol and Alan and others most recently, and just really shares these incredible stories with such a kind of human touch, and really, at least for me, has humanized these two design legends. They don't seem as heroic on some level because they are so human as well. And I think that for those of us on the team and those that get to interact with our collections and our properties, et cetera, we hope that that's one of the takeaways. Like they are extraordinary on a lot of levels, but they are also very ordinary, and the things that they were able to achieve, the values that they had, those are things that we all can adopt and adapt in some way.
Could I add one thing, which is...
You may.
Thank you. Well, I love giving the example of airport tandem seating. You probably may have sat in some at the airports. When Ray and Charles were asked to design airport seating, they didn't just go design a chair. They said you talk to the person who's going to buy your chair, but also the person who's going to take care of your chair. So they talked to maintenance teams across the country, and the biggest problem was replacement parts. They were heavily upholstered, 2 different shapes, took 2 or 3 people to pop out the old one, put the new one, and it took up a lot of storage. So when you look at airport tandem seating, you'll note the back and the seat are the same shape, that it rolls up in a tube and it just takes one person. And so to me, I loved watching how they just would reach out to everybody and always asking questions. And people would be surprised. And they're like, well, how else will we get to the right solution?
I was just going to add, all the places that you've seen Eames furniture, they're so pervasive in the world. And the airport tandem seating is something that I'm not even sure everyone recognizes as an Eames design. But I remember shortly after I got this job, when I was literally employee number 1, Lisa was employee number 0, and my dad was, I think, ribbing me a little bit, being like, "Oh, now you're a fancy president and CEO coming home to Milwaukee." He's just like, "Oh, we don't have any Eames chairs around here." And I'm like, we're standing in Mitchell International Airport in Milwaukee. I said, "Dad, every single chair here is an Eames chair." And I love that. I love, passing the laundromat on, Telegraph Avenue near where I live and seeing Eames shell chairs. I think that is evidence on a lot of levels of both the enduring, the test of time that their furniture has been able to do, but also just like how far out into the world that it's gone. It's remarkable to me.
Yeah, a way I might say that is what strikes me is that there's integrity in every direction in this, but by which I mean what is believed and professed and intended is also embodied and lived. And I would even say, so this is just kind of another layer of this what is scale. I think this is a quote from Charles. Eventually everything connects, people, ideas, objects. The quality of the connections is the key. What I just want to say, what strikes me is the quality of the connection they also made with you at a human level, grandparent to grandchild, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
And then it carries through everything
Right.
else they do.
And I just feel so fortunate that that avenue was created. Absolutely, of how they shared things and how they communicated with us. And that's what I'm saying. It's like being around them was just so remarkable and so special. And back to that guest host relationship, to make it fun on a visit, they kept the most detailed notes of all the short films they had shared at that point with us, what our favorite foods were. So then the next time we came down, they built upon what they'd already experienced with us before. Do you know what I mean? So like if we didn't have time to go fly kites that time, the next time we're going to. And so, but they also did that with their guests. But it's incredible. It is at that scale.
Yeah.
We have the name for our nonprofit. It started as the Eames Institute. I think all of us felt like it was a little boring, and so we went through this whole exercise to figure out how do we convey some of the Eames qualities, and their curiosity was insatiable, and that was something that we wanted to carry forward. So we added infinite curiosity to our names, and that's something that we try to espouse as an organization, but also that Lisa really models. And just the ability to ask questions, the like interest in understanding those connections and in fortifying them in new and creative ways. That's really where we're trying to push things.
And I also would think that being around my grandparents, like Polaroid, Edward Land sends him the new camera and just says, like, play with it. Tell me what you like doing with this. And it was just fun to watch them solve the problem. And they were always learning. Mm-hmm. So their boundless curiosity was one of the huge takeaways. But it's also just, there was such joy. They worked hard, but they played hard too. There was great joy in working hard, is probably the way I would put it.
Yeah, you said something to me, I wrote down. I think it was, take your pleasure seriously,
Yes,
they said.
Yes. they like to give the example that the tightrope walker at the circus is taking their pleasure very seriously because they love what they do, but they got to also nail it.
Yeah. I have to say, in my now 2 decades of interviewing people who are wise humans, I absolutely think that humor is a mark. It accompanies wisdom. And there are such interesting echoes. Speaking of this time we inhabit, the language of joy is very fiercely emerging, especially within the realm of people seeking justice, because it is understood that this is a life-giving, resilience-making human birthright, and that is partly what can power the long-term callings that we have. And I was thinking about this morning also, because the joy, the fun, the delight, it comes up again and again in all of these stories. And it's actually, I feel like you kind of carry it forward in time in your person, like we're experiencing it.
Well, it is. I also, another story some of you might not know, but I'm from the first marriage to Catherine, and Catherine and Charles had one daughter, that's my mom. Ray and Charles did not have children, but amazing grandmother. But During the Depression, there was no work in St. Louis for Charles. So he had my mother and grandmother move back in with her parents, and he went down to Mexico to paint houses, to paint buildings, anything to send money home. It's in this experience of being down there, he said he saw some people with far less than he had, but were much happier. And so he started asking questions. And you know what? It turned out they were working on a project for their community, for their church, for their family, for their school. That's where this Venn diagram that John is talking about became so important. It's way beyond what you're doing or what you're getting paid for. There's this other part out there that is just as important. So I wanted to make sure to add that.
Yeah, and I found that interesting too, that way that they, so you named this, John. There's a bit of an irony or paradox or something in that we're talking about furniture at this point that is, in cultural narrative is really cool and stylish, right? And coveted. and what's also true is what you're saying, that we don't realize that there's Eames furniture everywhere that isn't that expensive object that you can only have. But I guess I was interested to learn about this, because what is perhaps overlooked in that cultural narrative when it's superficial is that there's also this deep quality of functionality. And then this was so interesting to learn about how influenced they were by vernacular folk design, and by folk design in traditional cultures, and also, I don't know, what was it you said to me? Mother Nature is the OG of design.
I think Mother Nature is the OG of designers.
Yeah,
because they learn so much.
But I had
nature.
to look at the images, right? And if you actually look at the images and you stop thinking, oh, here is the most fashionable, expensive, desirable chair, and you actually look, you see how just for our show this week that just went up today, it's Janine Benyus who created, named and kind of created as a field biomimicry. And so fresh in my mind. But yeah, do you know what I'm saying? Like when you look at the images and the shapes, with this, knowing that this is this backstory, you see it.
One does. I mean, one thing Ray and Charles would often say is in nature, things evolve over time. The innovations actually die off very quickly. But it's something that keeps evolving and iterating, and that's what they then, so to me, they were inspired by nature. And so rather than just doing a do-over completely, I call it that they mended systems as opposed to replacing them. Because there's so much learning that's already happened to that point that when you pluck something out of the air, it's much more difficult for it to be successful. It's less likely. So that was that part of that inspiration. But the other thing is they just kept iterating and iterating on something, and even when something's in production with Herman Miller, we can still continue to hone it, use more sustainable resources, we can source things differently. And so you never stop learning is what I'm trying to say. And it really comes from nature. Charles would say innovate is the last resort.
I love that line and several others that Lisa has enlightened me with, especially in the Silicon Valley kind of context where we live. It's odd that people come from a lot of these big tech companies to our ranch, and they're used to operating with 3D printed and laser cut things, and yet bringing them back to like the basics of the kind of like 3D modeling, meaning like building, that Ray and Charles did, often without even the aid of drawings, I think is something that is really a pertinent reminder in this like technology-driven age.
People are so surprised at how many prototypes we have. Because Ray and Charles, like if you've said to me, Lisa, how many drawings are at the Library of Congress? We did ship them 750,000 slides after Ray and Charles passed away. There's actually very few drawings. The drawings are the prototypes. It's trying out the material. Because aluminum's going to be different than wire rod, which is going to be different than molded plywood, plastic, or fiberglass, all new materials. And I can go so on.
No, you make you speaking. It's really interesting what you're saying. Well, one of the things, there's this language of scale shifting. And is that connected to all of this?
Scale shifting as in, I think things can't happen in silos. They have to be across board. Ray and Charles were always also about breaking down silos. Like you didn't have to go to art school to be an artist. That was silly. It was more that you get the experience of primary experiences. I think what happens is I think it really gets back to being important how, as I said, Ray coming from painting and Charles from architecture, design is something to do. It's not something that's like to make a pretty picture or something like that. It's to solve a problem, which is what I just keep coming back to. The problem is, I find the challenges that we face today, whether it's climate change, social justice, climate justice, but also just thinking in terms of, again, eventually everything connects. It's important to make those things that were invisible visible. And that's part of what I like to talk about. And I'm finding my way of connecting these things with my grandparents' work, because I think that's very important for the world that we have today.
I agree.
You want to? In just a minute, I think we're going to have a roving microphone and open it up so you can speak and offer questions and thoughts. Did you want to say anything else about scale shifting?
I don't. I mean, I'm feeling a little, not a little, very nostalgic being back here. I love this place. The University of Minnesota, and what we called the College of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at the time, now the College of Design. It changed my life. It truly did. And in terms of shifting scales, I went from a very insular, conservative upbringing in Wisconsin to this place where I could explore in a very rigid, education in a college prep school. I came here and could just explore all these different things. And I found architecture, specifically as taught by some of the people in this room, to be this way of looking at the world that I desperately wanted for my youth. And I'm feeling like immensely nostalgic and grateful for that. But that was, when you talk about shifting the scales, this was the 4 years I spent here was the moment that happened for me. And I can't I'd be remiss not mentioning that. I really can't believe that we're here. So
It's full circle. I want to add that another thing is, I think one way that I try to communicate about empathy or how Ray and Charles were looking at things, is that they thought in terms of systems, and that systems are all connected too. And so Ray would often be asked, like, wasn't it chaotic when you're approaching that problem or something? And she'd say yes, but you find where there's one connection, and then you find another connection, and then you do another. I just think today what's so important with this empathy is thinking even larger than the Venn diagram that we're thinking. There's more circles and more layers, and everyone has to be taken care of.
I actually think the language of the quality of connection is so radical and almost and countercultural now, in a world where our technologies connected us and attended and put great sophistication and design into the connection and not into the quality of the connection. I wanted to ask you also, coming back to this idea of problem solving and there's this language that your grandfather used, the boundaries of problems, this fascination with the boundaries of problems, which is just so intriguing.
Well, I'll start this one. If you have one film to watch by my grandparents, it's Design Q&A, where he talks about some of the boundaries of problems. The thing that I find so interesting that I keep learning from them is that every situation has its own constraints. And the trick is to work within those constraints and not to compromise. Because when you start compromising, that's when the connections start breaking down. It's when you're working within the constraints that then you're honoring that, and then it uplifts, is what I find. And it's hard to do. I mean, it's very hard to do, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. And so I just try to keep examples in my mind of how I can show it through their work. But those are the qualities that are so important.
Okay, Alana somewhere has a microphone. Let's hear what you'd like to say.
Come on, throw some questions.
Yeah. I'm also aware that there are people in this room who are also experts in this subject, and I am not.
maybe for all three of you, but this is the kind of revisiting really a terrific era of design. I am curious what you observed in terms of Charles and Ray Eames working and collaborating with their peers, say Saarinen and others, because I'm sure they just didn't go out to the ranch and hang out. But
Well, for that, my mom would tell great stories of, I mean, Eero Saarinen passed way too soon. He was a dear, dear friend of Charles, and they used to call each other in the middle of the night to stake the claim on their ideas. So when the phone rang in the middle of the night, it wasn't like there was a fire at somebody's house. It was that they each came up with an idea, and then that was their idea. But yes, I mean, it really started at Cranbrook, where when that was a special. Noel was there. I mean, Florence. Everyone was there, who then spread out into the world of mid-century design. And I think you surround yourself with great people is also what Ray and Charles did, and so they learned from each other. So I think that was one of the benefits. But also, can I just say, I have found designers are very optimistic. Designers want to solve problems, and that is a really important thing. Like, there are eras where it might be harder to do things, but designers will get up and try to figure it out. And so that's part of why I love seeing what the designers are doing today, sustainably, culturally, all of the challenges that we face.
Knowing that Ray and Charles their curiosity was piqued by new materials, new methods, new processes. If they were to start their studio work today, what do you think they would be most interested in?
Lisa's always careful to not speak for them, generally speaking. I think I'll be interested in what you have to say this time.
I wish they were here because I want to see what website they would design. That's mine. And the joke that sometimes we have is like, maybe they wouldn't even be designing chairs. It's chairs were needed at that time. The GIs were coming home from World War II. There needed to be housing. That's why they did the case study program. And so they used themselves. They often use themselves as their own guinea pigs. I mean, they designed the furniture for their own living room. If it worked in our living room, it might work somewhere else. The same for the case study home. So for me, I saw them more focused on education programs like exhibits, as opposed to furniture, and making short films. The first thing my mom did after they passed away was put all of their short films on Laserdisc, Beta, all those old versions. Now we try to provide them for free online. But again, she considered them their essays and of exploring ideas. So I think it'd be filmmaking might be something, or also education, perhaps. I'm not going to speak for them.
I think there was a project that they were starting to do either with MIT, or maybe there was another project with an exhibit with the Washington Post, which they were focused on late in life as well.
So at the office, if you finished a project, first of all, when Ray and Charles came over and checked in, they never said, "Are you done?" They said, "What did you find interesting?" Which I thought was a really great question. And then, it engages you with the work. But Charles on his desk, I swear, it was over a foot tall stack of folders. And one time my mom and I were there, and he said, "These are all the projects we don't have time for." And so he pulled the first one on the top. You know what was on top? Sundance and Robert Redford starting that whole project. I was like, that's pretty good. Okay.
Well, I'm not sure, but was your question about materials, actual physical materials?
Physical materials, how? Like what the materials they would be making, like a product, or?
I think you mean, what would they be making it with?
Oh.
I think they were very invested in curving plywoods and things like that, and
Right.
using materials and processes to achieve their design.
Well, what I love about molding the plywood, if that's the example, the reason they were doing that was they were trying to create a design that was so comfortable you didn't need upholstery, which brought the cost down to the consumer. So what I'd be curious is, again, they would probably be perhaps designing seating, but with new ecologically, I think things are getting repurposed today in new ways. That would be interesting if they were approaching. So I think the materiality part, but it always first comes with them with the need, like whether it needs to be an exhibit to educate or it needs to be a piece of furniture for someone to be comfortable in. But if that helps. See, when I talk, it's a chain reaction, so sorry.
Isn't plywood making a comeback also? I feel like it's come full circle.
Hello. Sorry, I'm not as well versed on this subject as some of our other people here, but it's been really great to hear. Very inspiring. Anyways, I'm rambling. But I'd love to hear more about, it seems like Ray and Charles were very reflective. Like they reflected all of, like, you know, the Venn diagram, they reflected all of those ideas. It's like they were the sounding board or a funnel where they took those ideas and they slowly constrained them into something innovative or evolved, as you say. But I'd love to hear more about how they like gave, how they like gave back to those communities and how those communities felt like a part of the design process, or even yourself.
Your quick study, very impressed. Well, you know, even something as simple as working with Herman Miller. Herman Miller is Zeeland and Holland, Michigan. They purposely have factories in both places so that it could support two towns. So it was with Ray and Charles really liked that. In terms of supporting the community, I mean, for them, like when they did that first exhibit for IBM, which was in Los Angeles at the Science and Industry Museum, it was Mathematica, World of Numbers and Beyond. It still was there for about 40 years, and there's 3 sets of it. It was so successful because other communities wanted it. And so there's one in New York, one in Boston, and there's one at the Henry Ford in Michigan. And so they were wanting to excite everybody across the board for the mathematicians, scientists. And so that's how they thought they could give back, is putting their energies into sharing things in the exhibit to get someone excited enough. And what I mean by that is when they would design an exhibit, you can't show everything on a subject, but you could show 6 to 8 things that got someone excited enough to do their own research. And that's what they were trying to do in the community of Los Angeles and in Boston and in New York, if that's an example.
You've heard us reference the Eames Ranch a couple of times, I think, and that's something that our organization, you know, posthumous to their life, has really focused on making accessible to the public. So rather than this kind of private elite thing, we're very focused on making the land as well as the collection a lot more publicly accessible than it's ever been. And we've also been investing in other nonprofit design organizations that have a more robust mission that's not directly, we don't absorb their mission, we support their mission. And so we do that through grant making and fiscal sponsorship and a whole array of other kind of programming and partnerships. And that's been really amazing for us. So it's not like a direct extension of the Eameses. We're not placing the Eames legacy on them. We're simply trying to leverage our resources and our assets as a way to support, the communities that both we're a part of and that we admire. I think it's probably the best way to describe it.
And for the Bay Area community where I live and where the Eames Ranch is, after that show closed in Oakland in 2018, people missed seeing the exhibit because my family loaned over 400 objects they borrowed from other places. John mentioned earlier about like when Silicon Valley companies come and visit. One of the lessons one of the things they're very surprised to hear about is with Ray and Charles, nothing was a failure. If something didn't work, it was just a misconception, and you moved on. And so then in 2018 and 2019, as we're forming the nonprofit, we were going to go public and be in person, but COVID hit. And so actually, it was a great moment to pause and realize, let's put this all online. Let's start using it, because that reaches even more people, a larger audience across board. For me, it evened the playing fields, is what I wanted. And so what the exhibits are based on is what we're unboxing. We are still unboxing material that hasn't seen the light of day in 40 years. And so it talked about everything connects. My life is a giant Tetris memory game. I recognize this from over here that goes with this over here that comes. What are we going to be done, like 40,000 or 50,000 objects when we're done? I think is our estimate now. So again, that's another thing is the pop-up exhibits. We also are doing online. And people are coming to us with ideas, which we're happy to work with and partner with.
A question up here. I'm really curious about what their office was actually like. How many people they employed? I mean, they worked across so many disciplines. Did they actually employ people from film and other disciplines, or how did that all work?
It's a very interesting question. Oh, yeah. So they had some amazing staff, like Jahan Burns, who was one of my all-time favorites, who did a lot of research on projects and worked on the exhibits. But the thing was, Ray and Charles, when you came to work for the office, you might be working on a film, but then also working on a piece of furniture. The office is a very large space where the open space was in the middle, so that's where a piece of furniture could be getting designed next to an exhibit where all the things are getting push-pinned onto the wall and things are getting moved around. I often, with websites, do you hear about the alpha beta testing? I always felt when I visited the office, you would notice little things different, and did it work better? Like, do you get drawn towards it? And I mean, there was a musical tower that, so when Ray and Charles were designing the executive suites for the new Time Life building in Manhattan, they wanted to show some constants from nature. And one of them is gravity, right? A marble's always going to drop. But couldn't it play a piece of music? So they made these two musical towers. They're 12 feet tall. Well, they only lasted about 2 weeks at the new office and were shipped back to California to my grandparents' office. When you worked at the office, your first job was to change the piece of music. So the big question is, what piece of music do you want to hear over and over again? So it was a very playful office. I probably drove some staff members crazy, but they've come up, like Janine Openwall, who has done incredible work, set designer for LA Confidential, Seabiscuit, all these great movies. And she's come up and visited and really telling us stories around some of the pieces that she worked on. Other staff members have too. And so that's adding another layer of what they learned from it with that. And so.
And maybe just to connect, Ed's earlier question about people that they practiced with and collaborated with, a lot of their work came from George Nelson's office, which was a larger, studio out east. And the Eames office, interestingly, was never more than, about 20 people. Right. It was
only at the end for the big ones. But
much more like a dozen to 15 people, and yet you see the expanse of their work. They were so prolific, even though they were very compact in size.
But what they do is, if they worked with Herman Miller or Westinghouse, they would work with their teams. You see, and so that's how they would do it. I missed the office. It was very cool. But I get to live through the archival
The
material.
building is still there. It's had two notorious recent tenants. One of them is Facebook. The second is a vaping company. And so
if those walls could talk.
one of my dreams is to revive it, reopen it as a museum, something of the sort.
Where is it?
It's in Venice, California.
Okay.
It's 901 Washington, previously. Now it's Abbot Kinney Boulevard. I remember I was down in Los Angeles during the early phase of the shelter in place and needed a PCR test, something that we always used to say to each other. And, literally walked outside of this mobile clinic and looked, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm literally across the street from the Eames office. That was my first encounter and first impression of it. Was very masked,
Right.
very nervous. And, it's a really fascinating place.
I want to add also, what you remind me though is everything Ray and Charles could do was in-house. That's why they picked chairs. They called it architecture you could hold in your hand. In other words, you could control all the parts. As we all know, when you're building a house, you need mason, plumber, all this. Everything they did, they could control. And that was part of why I think they could be so prolific. And when they're working on an exhibit, they could apply those ideas to a multi-screen presentation, which then gets applied to maybe a National Aquarium proposal. So things were used multiple ways within the office, too.
Can I just add one more thing here? This just came to mind. We have a lot of historic photography of the Eames office, and it's this really dense, kind of eclectic place. We had a little bit of that, at the ranch as well. But I think the place that it still exists today is in design studios in schools, where there's things that are being made, and there's this kind of accumulation of stuff over the course of a semester or a quarter or whatever system we're on now. And so to any students in the room or instructors, I think that there is kind of a similar spirit in the studios as there was in the Eames office back in the day.
Just curious, I'm wondering, could you give us a sense of their professional evolution? And was there a moment in time when they kind of had a breakout product?
Charles was studying architecture school. He was at Washington University, and it's a Beaux-Arts school. There was a class about having a timeline on the history of architecture. He wants to include Frank Lloyd Wright. He's on scholarship. It goes up to the dean, and he's asked to leave. So for him, he ended up designing some churches and also about 7 or 8 homes in St. Louis where he was living. That caught the attention of Eliel Saarinen, Arrow's father, at Cranbrook, and Charles was invited to teach some design and architecture. Ray, meanwhile, grew up in Sacramento. Her father managed those huge theaters with like 5,000 people where there were dancers and performers and singers coming through. Her the dolls, where you do like the dress, cutout dolls, paper dolls, were stunning because probably inspired by what she saw. She studied at Hans Hofmann's studio in New York City, which is where she met Lee Krasner, who was dating a guy named Jackson Pollock. And then she goes to Cranbrook, and that's where they met. Their breakout, to me, was the very first project that they did. They got married and moved to Los Angeles so they wouldn't know anybody and could work on executing and producing the design that Arrow and Charles had won at MoMA, New York about this molded plywood seating. Now, back to the empathy, because we're going to go full circle on this. When Ray and Charles are working on this molded plywood chair, they have jigs and they have the machines making the prototypes in their apartment. They're at a party. And it's a doctor friend of theirs in 1942 who says the soldiers being carried off the fields in Europe, the injuries are made far worse by the vibration of the metal splint. And what could be done? So in that moment, they decided they would try, if they could, to make wood splints. And they did. By 1943, over 100,000 were made. But the real beauty thing was, it was a way Ray and Charles could help the war effort without hurting anybody. So that was the breakout. One more?
You mentioned working with the George Nelson designers. I happened to be lucky enough to have one of them as a teacher, Lucia DeRespinis in New York City. But they worked together on the Moscow exhibition, and from the stories she told, it was very madcap. And I don't know if you have any additional stories to add to that. I'd love to hear them. So.
You jump in.
I
love that project.
So this is what he's referring to is in 1959, Ray and Charles were asked to help bridge a cultural gap with Russia. And the way that, this is good. Okay. So the cool thing is Ray and Charles, I think much to the confusion of the State Department, decided to show the similarities between cultures rather than the differences. And that is something that Ray and Charles already were doing for the first 15 years before that, which is, for example, they would collect toys from around the world because, one, often toys are passed from one generation to the next. They're so well made. 2, there's often common ones like tops and kites. And what they wanted to see were the materials used. They wanted to see, how well they endured and such. And so when it came to doing this presentation for Russia, they said, we could just show one screen, but that's not that interesting. We can show, we have the scale models of how they realized you could do 7 screens. That's how many you could show. Now, it's that to show you have mountains, we have mountains. You have clover leaf patterns for your highways, we have clover leaf patterns. You go to school, we go to school. And it was really an amazing moment for Ray and Charles. The way they looked at this was they said, you know what? Our cities look much the same than at night from the stars. So why not focus on what we're similar about than our differences? Now, the trick was, this is like a 10-minute presentation. Thousands of pictures are being shown. Like today, this is normal. Back then, that was not normal. It just, how do you end it? Like, how? And so it's called, Ray and Charles would call this, it's the finial at the end of the staircase. How do you end something? And so they think about it and they think about it, and Ray comes up with the idea of ending it with a forget-me-not. And it actually means the same thing in both cultures, and everyone's weeping at the end. So that's how they did it. But it was, yes, you're reminding me, I heard stories from my mother and from Charles.
Madcap, that's a good word.
Madcap. Every time the State Department came to the office to see how the work was going on the project, these 7 screens, all the projectors broke at once. And it happened twice. What are the odds?
And when Lisa mentions the State Department, she's referring to the USIA, the United States Information Agency. They basically were commissioned to develop propaganda to show the Russians how superior the United States was. And so it was this effort on their part, which I think was really genius, to show the commonalities between them.
But By showing 7 screens and multiple versions, anybody watching that realizes how big the United States is. So with my grandparents' work, there's often a message within a message. Another example I would give is the Solar Do Nothing machine. So Alcoa comes to 20 designers and architects and said, what can you make with this aluminum? So you know what Ray and Charles made? This wonderful, whimsical, fun machine that does absolutely nothing fabulously. But when you're watching it film, at the very end, it pans down to a solar panel. What they're really trying to show you is there are alternatives to fossil fuels. So there's always the message in the message. And that's why, yes, it looks like a fun, whimsical toy, but actually they're thinking about the environment and having a place for the next generation to be.
Yeah. Talk about being resonant for now. Yeah. Are we good? Well, I wonder, is there anything else? What have we not talked about?
I don't think we've talked enough about you, Krista. The first thing, when I first heard that Krista was going to interview us, I'm like, this is definitely, but interview me at least. Lisa's maybe within it. This is definitely below Krista's pay grade. Me.
Not true.
And I remember the first time I discovered your work, it was a TED Talk that Krista gave at United Nations.
Let's be clear. It sounds really glamorous. It was a
little
dark
bit-
room in the
All right,
bowels
that's
of the
fine.
United Nations.
But the subject was generally around empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
But it spoke to me as a designer, and you didn't use the word design at all in my recollection. But it really moved me. And then when I had the opportunity to meet you a couple of years later, and have since had the chance to follow your work. It's really your interpretation today of the things that Lisa experienced in her youth and as the granddaughter, but also just being able to kind of track the way that my career has evolved into some of this. It's really profound. I mean, to have that kind of your ability to reflect back to us is just an enormous gift and honor. So I just mainly wanted to thank you for that.
It really is.
Thank you, but we're not here to talk about me.
Well, is there a project or something that you would like to know more about that where you saw threads of this or that we haven't gotten to yet?
Oh, no, it's probably too much. I was
go for
really
it.
aware. I am such a word person, right? And you said a minute ago we're having this conversation about visual things, tactile things, and I actually think it's worked because you can actually paint pictures with words too and with stories, and you do that, right? You've painted so many pictures for us.
There's so many more to paint. though.
I know.
And
Well,
the
that's
thing-
what I mean. I wonder if there's, and you also have this incredible treasure chest of amazing sentences that they spoke.
They were very good at that. That's true. I think for me, what I appreciate as I get older and am raising my own children, and this world is one thing they really talked about is the importance of teaching children no instant gratification, that you have to work towards something, otherwise we're doomed. And so there's just what helps me is in this conversation, I've already thought of some other ways to share stories at the ranch, just from the questions that you asked that for people to connect to. Another example is just how Ray and Charles, I just was amazed of how present they were for each of us grandchildren. So I wanted to be a sculptor. So you know what Charles said to me? You need to use every tool as well, if not better than the person you hire, or you won't know if they're doing a good job. And so it's back to the words. I mean, that's just a great way to put it. At the same time, Ray and Charles are also very good at we call it opening doors to ideas. And so when they would do an exhibit, this is just opening a door to think about conservation or to do this. It's not the last thing, and it's not the only thing, but it's the beginning of something. And that's what I feel like is tonight. It's just, I really enjoyed looking at this empathy through scale, because for me, when I heard this title initially, it was starting small, and how do you grow it out? How do you cultivate it? And because we cultivate curiosity at the ranch, but also how can you cultivate empathy and just and think about it in this new way.
So I do want to ask you a question about what you just said. I'm not sure it's really related to this, but perhaps it is. This idea of teaching children to resist self-gratification, I mean, doing that in an age in which we have devices that are with us at all times, practically appendages to our limbs, which were brilliantly designed to be addictive. So, are you able to bring this sensibility, to your children in this really different world?
Well, when you're on 27 acres, it kind of helps that you're on a ranch. So,
Yeah.
but what I mean by that is like we had goats, and so my children called looking out the living room window goat TV. So, I think the thing is I really have found it's part of my job to do that. It's like they're kids. They are learning and they're emulating what I'm doing and my husband's doing. So we have to make room for that. With your children, you're raising your children too. They're watching. Ray and Charles did this just like they were breathing, just sharing and doing all these projects. But I think it's very important to just show the process of how to get to that home run, and sort of what we're doing at the ranch. So Charles is often asked, did you design this chair in a flash? And he'd say, yes, a 30-year flash. And so what we're doing at the ranch is now a 30-year flash. It's almost 30 years since I've been up there. But I'm watching now how to do this take this to the classroom and how to teach like the slowing down and not the instant gratification. And it's hard.
That is something that, I remember my first visit there, Lisa said to me, you didn't take many pictures. I was actually like so overwhelmed, almost paralyzed by her storytelling, by the objects, that kind of thing. And it kind of planted the seed with, our early team about trying to have people park their phones before they come into the, kind of main ranch house, as a way to just be more present with the material. And interestingly, we haven't done that for a variety of reasons, but most people don't pull their phones out at the ranch. It's like a unique kind of experience. It's not like a normal museum. We don't have many like Instagrammable moments kind of by design. And we do generally feel like people are more present as a result. And I'm as addicted to my device as anybody, but like it feels amazing to be able to kind of create that space. And so that's something that we hope to carry forward into the future as well.
It's layered. What I love is that things are layered and it's not just one thing one's looking at. And kids are so bright and smart, they pick up on it, watching what they want to play with, like the bubble wands and stuff.
Yeah. I think I keep hearing how kids, teenagers, college students are actually grateful when they're invited to leave their phone at the door, right? You might call it a constraint that is welcome, that is that brings good things, not a compromise, but a constraint. I want to ask you one last question, and then I think Carol wants to come give us a benediction. I wonder how working with this legacy keeps the muscle of hope alive in you, both for your field and also for this world of ours, for each of you.
I feel like I was already so fortunate to have grandparents and just who supported. My grandfather didn't say, don't be a sculptor. He said, this is how you do it, and you can do it. I get almost choked up because I didn't know there was a way to convey this and to be able to share it, because what I'm just really hoping is that this percolates in all your heads. I hope you visit the website, email me a question if you think about it later, because I watch these aha moments in people who come to me 3 months later and they say, not just about the borscht, but about also just like, wow, you mean Ray and Charles didn't have that idea all figured out? You mean they really just solved the problem? It was hard work. Ray and Charles said, we don't believe in the gifted few. We believe that you get good at what you like to do. And our job as each grandchild was to find what you like to do. So don't just talk about it. The one time I would see my grandparents annoyed is when someone would say, I'm just going to jot this down on a napkin. They'd say, do it. Then the person would say, I might fail. They'd be like, yeah, but that's one less misconception. So that's the joy. This is my way I feel I can give back for the next. That's what brings me great joy.
I love seeing people respond to Lisa, to her stories, to our place, to our collection. That really is the kind of endless well of hope for me. And then also, through our online publication and other things, the ability to spotlight other really interesting designers, and people don't even identify as designers, as having like some connection to this legacy. it's kind of been this renewal of my interest in design, because I had actually left design for all intents and purposes for a number of years to work in the philanthropic sector and didn't actually see a path back until
I
this
remember
happened.
feeling sad about that.
That I had
also-
left design?
Yeah.
Well, I
back.
quietly.
He's back.
Yeah, I mean, I quietly. I was able to design a philanthropic program and system that continues to give real life. But it was amazing to have it come back. So.
And I also just have to say, it is incredible to have grandparents like Ray and Charles, and my mom was wonderful. But the gentleman over here has been phenomenal in how we are getting this legacy out in the world. And I am so fortunate because I wouldn't be sitting here, we wouldn't have a website. But John, with his philanthropic background, has really brought all his experience and his joy to this, of making this available. So I feel so lucky to be working with John, because we're always thinking about how can this be more available to more people, back to the empathy part. And he's just so experienced in this that what would have taken some people like years and years and years to figure out, John just steps up and how do we do this? And so I just want to do a thank you to you.
Well, I mean, what a gift to the world and to us tonight to take this in.
Thank you.
Well, the words of wisdom are here. Lisa, I just want to thank you for your generosity, and stories, keep them coming. We'll stay in touch. And John, your curiosity and energy. And Krista, thank you so much for answering the door and for being here tonight. Thank you.